If in our continuing discussion of therapy and the role of therapy, we're suggesting that the source of the problem in us humans is not the same, is not identical as the germ which creates a disease or a sickness, much as those are legitimate in their own realm, it raises the question for us of, well, what then is the source, is the basis? Where do we locate the source of the kind of problems that we want to talk about as psychological questions? Now, in the old days when Freud essentially introduced the whole idea of the unconscious and the subconscious and the fact that there were psychological problems, he was smack in the middle of the historical era when that kind of science was universally riding high and you could consider it to be universally the way anything that could be knowable could be known. So he talked about the clash of drives. Essentially, classical Freudian psychology is located in drive theory, the clash of drives. But nowadays, even the animals that we thought of for a long time as locked into their instincts are turning out to be a lot more flexible than we ever gave them credit for. For example, I personally saw, I love watching the nature programs on TV, and a few years ago I saw a series of shots taken by a very enterprising photographer in Africa who was caught a lioness pursuing a zebra across the screen. In other words, from left to right as he was photographing it. And at one point, one saw the zebra turn away from the lioness, and the lioness chased after the zebra. And just as she was about to pounce, the zebra kicked, and you saw the lioness tumbling over in a cloud of dust in the dirt. Well, he followed that lioness for about 6 months thereafter. And what was absolutely unmistakable was the fact that the lioness had become neurotic. He would photograph her time and again, chasing after legitimate prey, and just when she would reach the point where she was about to pounce, she would hesitate. She would abort the mission. She would not complete. And the only reason she survived for this period in which she was in that kind of non-determinate state was the fact that she fed with the pride, and others took prey, and she shared in that and was able to survive it. But if that's a drive, if that's a locked-in instinct in the old scientific sense of the word, it's news to me. This is even true nowadays. I saw a report recently where, with the pressure on their population in India, the tigers in India, which have universally been talked about as solitary hunters, lonely, have started to band together in packs and essentially create what we would call prides of tigers. Now, again, that's the kind of flexibility which a dead, locked-in instinct should not permit, and yet here they are adapting in this way. Apparently, originally, lions were that kind of solitary hunter as well, but long before the tigers caught on to the trick, they formed prides and find they survive better in these kinds of prides. So that leaves us with the question, okay, if there's some kind of difference like this possible in the animal world, what does that say for us humans? Now, as you may suspect already, what I'm approaching is some idea of assimilating this kind of knowledge with us as human beings. There's been a long history of us humans attempting to separate ourselves in some fundamental way from the animal world. You can see that in the ancient world, that wasn't so much a dedication. In other words, there are all kinds of gods and goddesses in the old pagan world, as we refer to it, that were mixed, human body with a lion's head, or part pelican and part lion or alligator or whatever. So that kind of mixture was, and therefore the essentially similarity of that world was taken for granted. But in more recent times, there's been much more of an emphasis on the separation. There's we humans who have souls and are different, and we die and we go to heaven, and the animals that don't, and they're different from us and fundamentally separated from us by some kind of fundamental biological chasm that cannot be crossed. I don't think that's legitimate. In other words, I think it's very important that we understand ourselves as part of the evolution of life on this planet, and that we are essentially sharing in that kind of development in our own way. Now, one of my favorite stories here that relates to this kind of knowledge, everybody that knows me knows this story because I like it so much, is the story of the elephants in South Africa. Apparently, a few years ago, there was a game preserve that was being overpopulated by the elephant population. And out of concern for these elephants, the officials in South Africa gathered a number of them and transferred them to another game preserve where there was ample food, there were wide open spaces for them to wander, and where in fact there were no elephants. And to their immense confusion and frustration, what these officials discovered was that in very short order, the elephants weren't behaving like elephants. In other words, first of all, they were fighting and very rough and, as elephants go, uncivil with each other. They were tearing up the landscape and wasting the food, essentially ruining it and not using it. And the third thing they were doing, which I cannot help but laugh, I think it's hilarious, is they were beating up the rhinoceroses in the game preserve. And this frustrated and confused these fish. Why? So they studied them for a while and then discovered that, as a matter of fact, they were gathering the elephants that they were trying to save too early. What they had to do was take these elephants up again and put them back